So with all of that information, what you need to keep in mind is DevOps cannot do it alone. I have actually heard some or watched some YouTubes where the gentleman was talking about or comparing, ITIL to DevOps, saying that ITIL is kind of a more of a vertical approach, or more of if you want to call it a stovepipe approach, versus DevOps that looks, end to end. This is totally wrong, right? So my caution to you folks is, please make sure, what information you're capturing and whether this information is correct or not. So yes, DevOps, and we have actually some, here you go. Yes, DevOps goes end to end, but DevOps, this end to end example that we're talking about is not covering everything within a service life cycle. This is covering your application. This is covering your development and operation. This is not covering your strategy and your design and your architecture, etc., right? So it's not true that ITIL is a vertical or a stovepipe approach. As a matter of fact, without ITIL, without Agile, DevOps will not work. So please make sure that you are, any videos or any knowledge that you capture, get it from a proper source so that you're not going through wrong information. This is all to say that DevOps is dependent, all right, on many other best practices, all right? We need to have a high-level architecture for all of this. We need to understand what is the DevOps reference architecture, what is the DevOps approach, right? And life cycle that we're gonna use and or follow. How dependent is it, right, on operational and or other processes? As an example, what about configuration management? We just talked a little while ago about code integration. So if you don't have configuration management, it's not going to happen, right? We talked about continuous testing. So if you're not going to have service transition, it's not going to happen. We talked about operation, right, versus the development team right here. And now you need to bridge these two together through DevOps. So it's like saying, right, just a high level example, it's like saying, development is here, operation is here, and this is how I'm going to marry them, right, throughout, the workflow that I established through all of these different practices. Yeah, so very important to actually see and understand the different dependencies. So this is a perfect example, right? We depend on Agile, we depend on IT service management and or ITIL, we depend on Lean IT, we depend on enterprise architecture that is going to have, the backdrop across all of those best practices, right? Discussion on the Agile Manifesto. So going back to answering the question, how do they relate? Well, just a quick example when we're talking, about processes and tools. So if the process is going to cause a bottleneck, well, here's what Agile is telling us. We value the process, right? However, we value individual and interaction more than the process. In other words, yeah, I want to have the process, but I don't want it to be a bottleneck. Just to mention an example. We talk about Scrum. And again, Scrum is one of the Agile approaches, right? And, it includes, of course, a certain model to follow. At the bottom, scrumguides.org, you can download it for free, right? And, within the Scrum iteration, we actually work, DevOps along the way, and you come to a point where you now have an increment. So that frequent release that we're talking about is one of your DevOps output, but DevOps is following the agile approach where you have, you know, the sprint, and you have your daily stand-up, and you have your review and retrospective, and so on and so forth as usual. So here's another example on this, right? So that product backlog could be, you know, let's call it a feature of some sort. So that feature, in order for it to happen, it's going to follow the cycle. But now that you get in to the actual sprint, you're doing DevOps in that sprint. Yes? And then, of course, there is, you know, the scaled agile framework where we're going beyond just one project. This is where we start talking about epic, right? Projects or epic, if you want to call them products, right? Requests, whatever the case may be, right? This is happening at an enterprise scale. So if you are familiar with Scrum, this is where we're talking about Scrum, off Scrum, etc., right? And here's a high-level example of all of this, right? So again, this is at the enterprise level. We have epics, right? At the portfolio level, continuous delivery and DevOps kind of discussions, right? And then you have your agile Scrum discussions that are happening at this level down below, right? If you take a closer look, right? So you have multiple, you know, again, features that you are introducing and so on and so forth, right?